Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Cincinnati Reds. We are at the midway point of the 2025 season, and it has by definition been a very mediocre season for the Cincinnati Reds. We are one game under 500 at 40-41. Fortunately for us, we're only half a game out in the tight NL Central. As Randy Pepler notes, the tight NL Central, as I am calling it, could also accurately be described as the terrible NL Central, but we'll continue calling it tight for the time being, not quite willing to admit that our team might be terrible. Despite being a losing team here on the 4th of July, we are actually in a playoff spot, the third and final wild card spot, as the season reaches its midway point. But you can see in the National League, which has a couple of excellent teams and then a big blob of mediocrity, there are 7 teams within 2 games of that final wild card spot. So it's going to be a real interesting battle to see if we can guide this team back into the playoffs, which is the only owner goal that we have to work on for this year. Quite honestly, we're also in the last year of our contract, and if we don't reach the playoffs, it's not inconceivable that we get fired. I think we've done a lot of good things over the first 2.5 years of this playthrough, getting the Reds into the playoffs last year, as I mentioned, and also, I think, doing a pretty good job replenishing our farm system through the draft and through international amateur free agency. But the results on the field have not been as expected. That said, the goal is certainly still to get to the playoffs with this team. We've got a little bit of money available to take on some salaries as we get closer to the trade deadline over the next few weeks. And the big thing that really needs to be fixed is our starting pitching. As Three Quarters Badger noted in a comment to our last episode, we've got over $50 million a year this season wrapped up in Corbin Burnes and Aaron Nola at the top of our rotation. And although their ERAs have improved a bit over the last month or so, Burnes at 5-4 with a 4.66 ERA, and Nola at 6-8 with a 5.24 ERA, are definitely not delivering the performance that we were hoping they would deliver when we gave them those big contracts. Nola in particular is getting to be a little worrisome, given that at this point our scout says his stuff is only average for a starter. And as we've talked about in the past, his movement is already below average for a starter. So going to have some decisions to make with this team as we get closer to the trade deadline. Do we bring on talent? Do we look to dump someone like Nola? And then we've also got the draft coming up in about a week where we can hopefully add some talent that will help the Reds in the future. And I know that some of you don't like it when I break immersion to talk about what's going on in the real sports world, and some of you do. But I'm going to just make a quick comment, and I know talking about American football will not thrill some of you, but just a quick analysis of the New York Jets draft last night. I think I mentioned when they made the trade for Aaron Rodgers that I felt like they gave up a little bit too much. As happy as I am to have Aaron is a more than competent NFL starting quarterback. And I think giving up a little more than they needed to cost them last night. I feel like the team had one obligation in the draft, and that's to do everything possible to ensure that Aaron Rodgers is upright and healthy and able to play an entire season. And by making that pick swap with Green Bay, where the Jets moved back from 13th to 15th, they ended up costing themselves any of the 4 top-rated offensive tackles available in the draft. Adding insult to injury, By dropping from 13th to 15th, the Jets dropped behind the Patriots, who had the 14th pick, and they were the ones who traded away that pick to the Pittsburgh Steelers so they could take the fourth offensive tackle in the first round, a pick before the Jets were ready to go. So perhaps the linebacker that the Jets got, Will McDonald IV, is going to end up being great at rushing the quarterback. Hopefully he will be. But right now, quite honestly, my feeling is the Jets have failed in their first test of trying to ensure that Aaron Rodgers is as successful as possible in this upcoming season. Maybe they can get some help for the offensive line in the second round, but it certainly seems that in the prognosticators' rankings, there's a big drop-off from that fourth offensive tackle to the fifth one available in the draft. But again, we're talking about 21, 22, 23-year-old youngsters coming out of college at this point, and while the draft may not be a complete lottery, there is definitely a lot of uncertainty. But back to our Cincinnati Reds, and I mentioned that although conceivably I could be fired after this season if we don't make the playoffs, I feel like we've done a pretty good job retooling the Reds roster. And our minor league system ranks third right now. I know some of you enjoy when we do a little bit of a deeper dive here. Won't go incredibly deep, but we'll let you know who the top players are and how they're doing. You can see we've got 6 top 100 prospects at this time. Braylon Minier, the number 1 prospect in our system, number 9 overall. Moved him up to Double-A this year, and he's been real successful so far, hitting .311 with 8 homers and 267 at-bats. We're trying to get him a little more versatile in terms of the positions that he can play once he's fully trained up at second base. We'll probably actually give him even a little time at third base. Just want him to be as versatile as possible. Certainly looks like he has a bat that will make him a pretty useful major league infielder. The issue is he's not a well above average infielder at any position. The range suggests he's a third baseman. The arm suggests he's a second baseman, so not a perfect situation for him. He could play left field. Probably has a bat where you'd feel okay playing him at a corner outfielder, but I think more likely we'll accept his defensive limitations and have him somewhere in the infield in the future. A very young prospect, Luis Carabajo, who you may remember we picked up earlier this year as an international free agent signing, is viewed as the number 15 prospect in all our baseball. He recently turned 17 years old, so he is still at our international complex, but think that he could be a very interesting bat in the outfield for us. Probably will ultimately move to a corner outfield spot, but very excited about seeing what Carabajo can do. Jorge Guerrero, also at the international complex. You may remember him from the season before last, where he was our marquee international free agent signing. He's the number 54 prospect in baseball at this point. Certainly looks like he could have a interesting bat. And he's also a guy who has potential to be an interesting pitcher down the line. Certainly no guarantees that he's going to develop to be a major league star in either of those disciplines, but given his high work ethic and the potential we think he has, while he may not end up being a great two-way player, hopefully he can be a very productive major leaguer wherever he ends up. Carlos Jorge, 21-year-old, number 63 prospect in baseball, playing an A-ball, and he's hitting just .245. He's almost 22 years old, and this is the third consecutive season that he hasn't advanced beyond A-ball. Quite honestly, we're probably going to move him up, as I'm thinking about this, to at least high, or we have moved him up to high A-ball. We've moved him up to Dayton from Daytona. So I did that couple of days ago when I finished up my last episode. Had already forgotten about it, but think maybe he just needs to break out of the grind of being an A ball for, the better part of 2 full calendar years at this point. So we moved him up to the Dayton Dragons in high A ball. Certainly would expect that next year at 22 we'll see him in double A, but hopefully the fact that he hasn't been an incredibly productive hitter can be improved with a little bit of a change in scenery. Joshua Hod, starting pitcher prospect, who we took number 1, 4th overall last year, number 66 prospect in baseball, has not been good. He was 1-1 in a small sample size last year in rookie ball. This year he's 0-4 with a 9.64 ERA. And he's getting a little older. He's already 20 years old, recently had his birthday. Would love to be able to get him into A ball relatively soon, but thus far the early returns in rookie ball have not been impressive. And then Sal Stewart is a player we inherited when we took over the Reds organization, number 84 prospect in baseball, 21 years old, made it up to double A this year, hitting 285, only 4 home runs and 246 at-bats, corner infielder, not a brilliant hitting prospect, but certainly looks like someone who could be useful for us. And certainly with the case of Mini A and Stewart, who are both in double A, and Jorge, who will likely be in double A late this year or early next season, we're going to need their help, because taking a look at our salary position, our salary is $118 million-ish right now, expected to go up to over $150 million next year as some of our arbitration eligible players start making big money. So we are going to need to make some tough decisions this off season unless our budget gets increased very significantly. So having some players who by next year may be ready to help us at the major league level is critically important. And we've made it to the first-year player draft, although we haven't been playing very well over the first week and a half of July. You can see we're 42 and 46, last in the NL Central. The benefit of being in a bad division, though, is that although we are last in the division, we're only a game and a half behind. Pretty crazy how tight this NL Central is. Every team in the division now has a losing record. So it is not great baseball being played in the NL Central this year, but we are still absolutely in the playoff mix, and once we've made our decisions in this draft, we're going to really turn our attention to the potential trade market and seeing what we can do to ensure that this team does get back into the playoffs this year. And our Reds will be picking 16th this season. And we do also have a supplemental first-round pick from the loss of Zach Wheeler, so that will help a bit. We'll be picking, I believe, 35th overall with the second compensatory pick between the first and second rounds. So we're going to have the opportunity to bring on some talent. The issue is the talent in this draft is not particularly impressive. You can see we've got very high scouting accuracy, and we're scrambling to try to get a final scouting report on some of these guys, which we failed on. But we only see among the pitchers 1 3-star potential prospect. And even among the batters, there's a handful of really big-time prospects. And then after that, a lot of mediocrity. So it's not a particularly deep draft, at least according to our scout. Not sure what's going to be there for us at 16 and with the supplemental first-round pick, but we will do the best that we can. And we've simmed ahead to our pick, Gavin Richards, the starting pitcher who's viewed as the highest potential prospect by our scout. Doesn't particularly look very exciting for a 16th pick in the draft to me. Does have a 3-pitch arsenal that are close to major league quality at this point, but even if he fully develops, he's going to be a 5th starter. Also has a pretty prickly personality, so certainly think that that is an unlikely route for us to follow. There are a few of the batters available that our scout regarded more highly. First and foremost is Vaughn Necker. Third base prospect, not great defensively. At 6'5", could certainly also play first base. Could also play a corner outfield spot for us. So there's a little bit of position versatility there. We think that his bat could be above average, certainly, but not an exceptional bat. But certainly if he gets to 65 contact and 65 home run power, he could be a very productive major league hitter. So he is an interesting prospect. Dean Moss, 19-year-old left fielder. He is a left fielder, and that's really the only place you'd want to play him. Looks like he can also play first or third, but not great defensively. Certainly like the potential home run power, which is well above average if he reaches his potential of 70, and could still be above average in his contact gap power and eye. So certainly looks like a useful offensive bat, similar to Necker. Not a premier defensive player, but certainly seems like he could hold his own against major league pitching. Luke Billings, right fielder, similar to the other guys, not exceptional defensively. Few concerns with his personality, and the bat is not quite as impressive in terms of his potential. Don't think we'll be going there. Gavin Fine, a 18-year-old shortstop. Don't love the low work ethic. Not exceptional defensively, particularly for a shortstop. Honestly, he's a bit similar to Minier that we were just talking about in our farm system, in that he can play a fair number of infield positions, but not necessarily at an extremely high level with his ratings. Bat looks like it could be a little above average if he completely develops, but I don't see us going there. Landon Schaefer, another shortstop. Probably a little more interested in him than I am in Fine, but a good but not great prospect. And Tanner Thatch, 21-year-old out of UNC Wilmington. First baseman, looks like he could be a average major league bat, not great defensively. So the players available here, even at number 16, are not overwhelmingly impressive. Scouting director recommends we go with Vaughn Necker. I think he is certainly in the mix, but we're going to do a little more scouting offline just to make sure we're not missing anyone particularly interesting, and we'll let you know what we decide. And we are ultimately going to follow our scouts' recommendations and go with Vaughn Necker. Although I don't love his glove defensively, he's got a good enough bat that he could become a first baseman. If he fully develops, that 65 contact and 65 home run power are going to make him a pretty useful offensive player. Could play him in left field or right field if we had to, but I honestly wouldn't feel great about that. He's realistically most likely a first baseman. He's got a little bit of pitching ability, but not really enough to be a big-time prospect. You could argue he's a two-way player, but with the lack of control, I think although he's got 3 close to major league pitches at this point, just don't see him being a real big-time pitching prospect. So we're going to focus on him as a batting prospect. His bonus demand is also well over slot, which will help us out financially, potentially, as we try to maybe bring on some other talent through trade to help ensure that the Reds get into the playoffs. So we are going to make Vaughn Necker the 16th pick in the 2025 Major League Draft. And we're now to our supplemental first round pick, the second pick of the supplemental first round. Scouting director recommends we go with Gavin Richards, the pitcher that we talked about. Not going to lie, the personality does concern me. He is a potential two-way player, but I don't think he's a big-time offensive player. Problem is, I'm not convinced he's a big-time pitcher either. Now, granted, beggars can't be choosers here in a weak draft towards the end of, well, actually past the end of the actual first round in the supplemental picks for the first round. We're going to investigate some other options. You can see Billings and Fine, who we also talked about, are still on the market also, although their signing demands are both very high, and they both had some personality quirks that we didn't necessarily love. And here with the supplemental pick, we are going to overrule our scout. Gavin Richard's, the personality is just such a problem to me. I don't want to deal with it. Obviously, with the lack of intelligence and the lack of leadership, that can have a negative influence on our clubhouse and in some cases on his potential development. So we're going to go with Cam Caminiti, who's a similar prospect, not as high a ceiling potentially, but he does have 3 close to major league pitches at this point also. He's got the high work ethic that hopefully will help him continue to develop. He's a lefty. He's a borderline 5th starter at this point with where we think his potential is. But we've also got very good coaching in the minors that maybe can unlock some hidden potential. He's got the work ethic to achieve the most with what he has. OSA ratings are a little bit higher in terms of stuff, but weaker in terms of his movement. Not a great prospect, but somebody that we will try to work with. Also not looking for a ton of money, so we're going to go ahead and draft Cam Caminiti. Now here in the second round, I'm assuming Richards is going to still be our recommendation. No, our scout somehow has moved on from him, now suggesting Coy James, a young shortstop. Not a horrible prospect. Can play just about anywhere in the infield. Not great defensively at anywhere in the infield. Looks like he could have a acceptable major league bat. Certainly not a horrible prospect. But we are actually going to go with another pitcher. We're going to go with Luke Papano. Has a profile, is a best case scenario, a 5th starter. But he's also kind of got a profile that a best case scenario is he's a 5th outfielder. So the hope is that maybe he exceeds either of those as he develops. So we're going to go with Papano here in the second round. Moving on to the third round. The pickings are getting slimmer. Actually, it's the 4th round because we lost our 3rd round pick when we made the free agent signing of Corbin Burns. So scouting director is now recommending shortstop Jorge Gonzalez-Fibo. Pretty generic infield prospect. Don't love the low leadership and work ethic. We're actually going to go with a catcher, Omar Cerna, here in the 4th round. Looks like if he fully develops, he could be a decent backup catcher in the majors, a little above average defensively, a bat that at least could be acceptable. Don't think he's a big-time prospect, but at this point we're just looking for someone who can make a plausible scenario that could help us at the major league level down the line. A little expensive in terms of his demand for a 4th round pick, but fortunately we were so light in our first 3 picks in terms of what the players were looking for that we could still be able to fit him in under our budget pretty easily. And we've made it through the draft. As I mentioned, both Necker in the 1st round and Caminiti in the supplemental 1st round are looking for well below slot So that'll help us ensure that hopefully we come out of the draft with our players signed quickly and for less money than we had set aside. And if we're able to do that, hopefully within a couple of weeks we'll have opened up a little more than the 1.1 million that we think we do have available to hopefully help us bring on some talent to get this team into a playoff spot this year. And as we hit the All-Star break, we are still a last-place team, 43 and 48, 2.5 behind in the mediocre NL Central. And we are 3 behind for a wild card spot at this point. So we've actually got a better chance of winning the division at this point than we do of even just getting a wild card spot. Find out who we have on the All-Star team. As we talked about in the previous episode, Elly De La Cruz having a monster season for us with the bat. Nick Lodolo having an excellent season for us on the mound. Would expect that both of those guys will be All-Stars. Don't know if there's anybody else who will make the All-Star team from Cincinnati in this somewhat disappointing season. Corbin Burnes, the reputation got him there. 6-5 with a 4.49 ERA, but Burnes is an All-Star in his first year with the Reds. Lodolo, obviously at 11-6, 2.86 ERA, makes the All-Star team. And other than that, it's just Elly De La Cruz, 328, 21 homers, 30 stolen bases, his first full year in the majors. Not a shock with numbers like that are going to have him in the MVP conversation that he's also an All-Star. So De La Cruz and Lodolo as expected, and Corbin Burnes, our third All-Star, as he gets a little reputational respect. Probably the big contract that he signed didn't hurt either. And we're back from the All-Star break. The month of July has not been really kind to the Reds. 44 and 50, still last place, 3.5 games back. So we are slipping behind the other teams in the division a bit. And we are now 3 games out for the wild card. So we're more likely to get a wild card than the division at this point, I guess. Not sure if that's positive or negative. Probably negative. We've got 10 days until the trade deadline now, so it's really time to get serious about hopefully bringing someone on board, but also realistic about what we are as a team. You can see at 44 and 50, we are 3 games below our Pythagorean expectations, and that would put us just half a game out in the division. Home record this year has been very disappointing at 20 and 27, and you can see we're 6 and 10 in the month of July as we've slipped back a bit in the standings. We're a pretty mediocre team in our offense, 7th in runs scored, and we're a pretty mediocre team with our pitching, 9th in runs allowed. The batter ERA, or the bullpen ERA, has improved to 2.94, 3rd in the National League, but the starters ERA of 4.98 is very disappointing given the amount of money we've invested in the pitching staff. You can see Nola does have his ERA below 5. Not that that's really something we should be proud of and thrilled about, but both Inoa and Wright. Wright was a 10-game winner last year for the Braves. Inoa was a 14-game winner last year for us. They've both been brutal. Certainly think that we could upgrade at the 4th or 5th starter. That could help move us in a better direction with the pitching staff. We do have guys like Clark Schmidt, who's really had a nice year this year when we haven't made him be a starter. Will Warren, Brett Martin, Ian Anderson, who could all be in the mix for some time as a starter for us. But there may also be an option on the trade market that could be a decent upgrade as well. But 19 starts for both Inoa and Wright, and it's just not working with either of those guys. So it may be time to make a change. And as the trade deadline approaches, we're starting perhaps the addition by subtraction method of team building. We've shopped Spencer Steer, third baseman, who's hitting 205 this year, 2 homers and 127 at bats. He's okay defensively. He's historically been an okay bat. But with the amount of good youth we have, and the fact that he's been a pretty unproductive player this year, would like to open up the ability to maybe bring a Matt McLain back up from AAA by moving on from Steer. And we've got some interesting potential offers for him. Most interesting is Max Meyer. I don't think the Diamondbacks will really give him to us for Steer straight up. But decent movement on his pitches, extreme ground ball tendencies, a borderline starter with that third pitch, the changeup, just being average-ish, but still has been a pretty productive pitcher this year out of the pen for the Diamondbacks, and think he could certainly upgrade our pitching staff, almost certainly in the bullpen, and possibly as a starter for us. We'll go ahead and submit that offer to Arizona and see what they think. As I mentioned, if we did move on from Steer, that would potentially give us the ability to bring up Matt McLain. The other guy that we could bring up, though, would be Edwin Arroyo to potentially take over as our starting shortstop for Nick Ahmed, who, despite his good glove, is only hitting 201 at this point and barely above replacement level because his bat is just so bad. So I think it would make sense to move on from Steer, particularly if we can bring back a pretty respectable young pitcher for him. I'm guessing we're going to have to put in more to get that deal done, but we'll find out. And the other thing that we need to think about is TJ Friedl in center field. The glove is fine, but the bat is bad. 210, negative WAR on the season. We could give Kei Kodama more playing time. He's got the same kind of range, but makes a lot more errors when he gets to the balls. But Kodama is hitting 301 for us. So certainly there's an argument to just make Kodama the everyday starter over Friedl at this point, given that Friedl's just been so unproductive. We do like Jay Allen II's glove for a center fielder in the minors very much. Not so sure about his bat. He's hitting 257 in AAA this year, not a ton of power. But if he could hold his own as a major league hitter, he could potentially be a valuable player with that really nice glove. And Friedl, similar to Steer, is actually going to be arbitration eligible this coming off season. So we're going to at least shop him around. I'm guessing we're not going to be incredibly impressed with the offers that we receive. But if we could potentially move on to Kodama and bring up the minor leaguer, might be something for us to consider. And the offers for Friedl, unfortunately, were not that exciting. The other thing that we do have with Friedl is he does have 2 option years left, so we could certainly send him down to AAA. But I think what I'm going to more likely do is we're just going to take Friedl out of the lineup at this point and put Kodama in as our full-time starting center fielder. Hopefully Friedl will still be around at the major league level to serve as a hopefully really good defensive replacement for Kodama. We'll wait to see back what happens with this offer with Steer. The starting pitchers who are openly available on the trade market are not incredible, and I do question how much of an upgrade we'd really be getting from any of them. Chris Paddock, Georgian Montgomery, Nathan Eovaldi, and Dylan Cease are the 4 top guys out there. I think they could all potentially help us as fourth or fifth starters, but you look at their actual ratings, and I don't know that they're really materially better than Enoa or Wright. I think we're at a point where we've probably got to give Clark Schmidt another chance over one of them. But I don't really have a strong opinion about what we need to do. I want to get this team into the playoffs. I think it's capable of being a solid playoff team. But I certainly don't feel like it makes sense to mortgage our future this season. And we did hear back from the Diamondbacks. Looks like we can get Max Meyer for Spencer Steer. We just need to put one more non-prospect into the deal. So I think we are going to do that. Just hasn't worked out with Spencer Steer here, particularly this season. He's going to be making around $2 million next year for a average-ish major league bat, a okay major league glove, whose productivity has declined pretty materially in each of the 3 seasons he's been in the majors. As I mentioned, we've got other good young talent in AAA that can easily replace him. And I do think that, although I think Max Meyer would be better in the bullpen, he could potentially help us as a starter as well. So we've got a lot of mediocre pitchers who they will accept as part of this deal. We'll go with the 25-year-old minor leaguer Alexander Johnson to get the deal done. So add Alexander Johnson into the deal. We're going to complete the trade. Fans are pleased that we brought Max Meyer on board. We're going to need to make a roster move with our pitching staff to get him up to the major league team. And then we're also going to need to figure out what we want to do to replace Spencer Steer on the roster. It's likely to be McLean or Arroyo. The question is whether it's time for us to replace Nick Ahmed at shortstop, in which case we'd bring up Arroyo. If we'd rather get another bat at third base, we'd probably bring up McLean. But we do have Encarnacion Strand and the Rule 5 pick Errol Vera, who stand to both get some more playing time with the Steer departure. So I think I'm leaning towards making a big move at short. And we're going to send Ian Anderson down. He's put up a 4.67 ERA and 17 1/3 innings pitched this year. Send Anderson down to Louisville. That'll let us bring Max Meyer up. Be interesting to see whether David Bell wants to put Max Meyer into the rotation. He doesn't, but he does want to put Clark Schmidt into the rotation for Kyle Wright. And I'm willing to do that at this point. Clark Schmidt was not successful for us as a starter last year, but he's been good out of the bullpen this year. And Wright, with that 1-11 record and 6.30 ERA, has been an abject disaster. We'll give Schmidt a start or two. I don't think Max Meyer is going to look as good as a starter as he does as a reliever. Let's just do that right now. Yeah, and his stuff goes down to being just a bit above average, but he still is a profile where he might be better than what we have out there at this point. We're going to keep him as a reliever for the time being. The stuff down 10 points if he's a starter, but I would be willing to potentially try him as a fourth or fifth starter if Enoa continues to struggle and or Schmidt doesn't do well in the rotation for us. And I'm struggling with what to do with Edwin Arroyo and Matt McLean. I think Matt McLean's bat could definitely help our offense more than Arroyo's could. So I think at this point I'm going to keep playing Ahmed at short, but the leash on him is getting very short. But Matt McLean, who we did send down to the minors this year just to continue improving his defensive versatility, and you can see he can now play first, second, third, short, or left for us. We're obviously not going to force start him as an outfielder in the majors and actually kind of set his position back to third base, where he's not optimal because of that average arm. But I do think that the bat and the ability to be a switch hitter could certainly help us. He's hit 289 with 24 homers in AAA this year. He doesn't have anything left to prove at that level. And I don't think he can do worse than Spencer Steer was doing for us in terms of his bat. And we're going to try to make another trade here. Center fielder TJ Friedel, got him in a deal along with Brayan Nolasco, decent right field prospect. Although he's still in rookie ball, he is hitting 285 there this year. For Jack Sawinski from the Pirates, a little bit better of a bat than Friedel, also a left-handed hitter. The glove is not quite as good, but still has the 65 range in center field. But looks like a guy who could just give us more offense than we're getting from that position than Friedel right now without completely ruining ourselves defensively. Not sure what the Pirates will think about this offer, but we're trying to do some things on the margin here that will hopefully make the team a little more competitive this season. And unfortunately, the Pirates said no way to that deal. So still got to keep thinking what we want to do. Record is 44 and 52 at this point, 5 games back, still in last place. So as we're creeping up towards the trade deadline, we've lost 4 in a row, not getting any closer to the playoffs at this point. 5 out in the division, 4 out in the wild card spot, and lots of teams that we need to climb over in both of those races. And I think we've pieced together a deal that could help our pitching staff. We can get Chris Paddock from the Brewers. We have to send the right field prospect, Brayan Nolasco, who's definitely a decent outfield prospect. Pitcher Graham Ashcraft, who's been a reliever for us the past 3 years. Nothing special there. Juan Yepez, who's in AAA for us. We picked him up in a trade over the offseason with St. Louis. Doesn't have a big part of our big future with us, I don't think. And third baseman prospect Leonardo Balcazar. Decent third base prospect, hitting 286 since recently getting promoted to AA, but not an exceptional prospect. And then we've got to throw in one other player to make it work. They'll keep 60% of Paddock's salary. Think that he can definitely help the back end of our rotation. He's going to be a free agent after this season, so we're not making a long-term commitment, but think that that arm could definitely help us given the struggles that we've had with our rotation, particularly in those 4 and 5 spots in the rotation this year. So we've added Dualvert Gutierrez into the trade, and we're going to go ahead and complete it. I think it makes sense. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think it makes sense. But it certainly, at the very least, lets us get Schmidt back out of the rotation. He did pitch that one game for us, and when we look at his game log, he was close to respectable, almost a quality start, 3 earned runs over 5 2/3 innings, did allow 8 hits, a homer, and a walk, got the loss, game score of 44. So he certainly wasn't overwhelmingly impressive. And Paddock, actually, at least according to David Bell, will slot in as our third starter ahead of Aaron Nola. So I think it makes sense. That moves Inoa down to the 5 spot with that 3-12 record and 6.54 ERA. he's certainly in danger of being the next one to lose his job. But I think that the additions of Paddock and or Paddock and Meyer over the last week or so hopefully will help stabilize this pitching staff a bit. And the lineup is obviously the other concern. We've moved on from Steer, so we've got Matt McLean up now. We're going to run with Friedel and Kodama as our center fielders for another couple of weeks. Going to continue with Nick Ahmed at shortstop for another couple of weeks. I don't think trades are going to fix those issues. If we need to improve our center field defense, because Friedel's just not hitting, we can bring up Jay Allen the second next month. And he's probably not going to hit much either, but he's a better glove than either Kodama or Friedel out in center field. And if Nick Ahmed, whose chance of us exercising his team option next year keeps dropping by the day, continues to struggle, and he's now below 200 with a 197 average, we've got the option to bring up Edwin Arroyo. Not quite as good a glove, but still 70 range at shortstop, still more than acceptable to put out there defensively, and think that he would give us a little more offense. So I feel like the other two moves that we are potentially going to want to make to improve our center field defense and potentially improve our bat at shortstop, we've got the tools to do that within our organization. So I don't think we need to go make another trade right now. And given that after the Paddock trade, we've basically got no money available, it would obviously be very hard for us to make a trade from that perspective as well. So we have been really struggling late. The record has dropped to 44-55. You can see we've now lost 7 in a row at this point. Hopefully can stabilize things over these last 4 games in the month of July, and then see what this team can do in August and September. It's certainly been a brutal stretch since the All-Star break, 1-7 coming out of the All-Star break. So we can't really do much worse. And with the moves that we've made, we're actually going to send Kyle Wright down to AAA. He's not going to be happy about this at all. But he's got 1 option year left. He does refuse to be demoted, not surprisingly. The reason I'm talking about this is that Rever Saint-Martin, who's been a nice lefty reliever for us the past few years, has been on a rehab assignment where he's done well in Louisville. Been down there long enough that we've got to make a decision on him. We could keep him there. He won't be happy about that either, I'm sure. But that's certainly another option. We don't have any obvious guys to send down in terms of our pitching staff, particularly in the bullpen. They've been really good. I guess, do we send down Inoa? Ooh, he's out of option years, so not really an option. So these former Braves pitchers have been the bane of our existence this year after Inoa was pretty good last year. And with Kyle Wright refusing that minor league assignment, we did just put San Martin down in AAA, took him off of the IL, and he's now going to be in AAA for the time being. Certainly would expect that we'd see him on September 1st, if not earlier. We did, as you may have seen, finally break that long losing streak against Washington. We've got 3 in a row against St. Louis to finish off this month of July. They are only half a game behind in the division. Clearly, if we could sweep them at home, that would be a big step in the right direction for our team before we get to the end of the month. And unfortunately for our Reds, after taking the first game at home against the Cardinals, we lost 2 in a row. So mercifully, a brutal month of July is in the books and complete. we've definitely been moving in the wrong direction. You can see 2-8 over our last 10, 7.5 out in the Central, and we are 7 behind for the third wild card spot. So take a look at the damage for that month of July, and 8-17 record, 320 winning percentage really knocked us out of the playoff race. That said, we're 4 games below Pythagorean expectations, so we've been a bit unlucky this year. Right in the middle of the pack, 8th in runs scored, falling down towards the bottom of the league in terms of 12th in runs allowed. Bullpen ERA still solid, starters ERA still bad. Feel like on the margin we made some moves to improve our chances, bringing on Paddock and Max Meyer into the rotation, or into the pitching staff. Paddock in the rotation, Meyer for now in the bullpen. Don't know how many more starts we're going to give Huascar Inoa before we move on and give Max Meyer a chance. Honestly, Max Meyer hasn't pitched much. I think we're going to make that move right now, quite honestly. We can't keep running Huascar Inoa out there. Might as well see what Max Meyer can do. It's hard to imagine that he can do worse than the likes of Wright and Inoa have done this year. So as the month of August begins, our rotation is going to be Burns, Lodolo, Paddock, Nola, and Meyer. Hopefully we'll get some better pitching out of this pitching staff over the last 2 months of the season. That's going to be critical to our success. And as we get into the month of August, also going to have to figure out what to do with Friedel in center field. I guess he's got the batting average up a bit to 218. I don't know how long we're going to keep running him out there, though. I think there is certainly an argument to be made. You just bring up Jay Allen and put Jay Allen out in center field every day to help our pitching staff. If you've got thoughts on that, would love to hear them in the comments. And then the other potential issue is our starting shortstop, Nick Ahmed. The batting average still at $197. The glove still there. It's just the bat is no good. And Edwin Arroyo would give us a glove that's close to Ahmed's with hopefully a much more interesting bat. He's hitting .278 with 16 homers in AAA. If you've got thoughts on that, would love to hear those in the comments also. To me, those are the 2 big decisions that we potentially need to make in the coming weeks as we try to ensure that August and September are going to be much better and more productive months on the field for the Reds than the month of July was. And we'll find out how August and September go in our quest to get this struggling Cincinnati team back into the playoffs in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.